Right, hi everyone. So this is the silver finals motion, I believe, for DADC 2023. This house, as a very average person, would choose to be immortal. The subtitle is basically the important things in the info slide. So you can't die, you can't age past 40, and it's just gonna be you. So for what it's worth, this was also the round 8 motion for the World University Debating Championships. As a quick aside, this was Worlds 2023 in Madrid. And the way it works is that in round 8, it's the second last preliminary round. So basically the stress is really high. Because it's like everything's on the line at that point. And so this was the motion that we were given this year. I have reservations about this motion, but I will explain how you can do them and why there is value in the way this motion is set, in this motion being set. So the first thing we need to do is to set up the debate. And I think there are two important questions that generally need to be asked. The first is, what does an average person want? And this is a question that you will see in a lot of debates, because to me, there are two types of actor motions. The first type is actor motions where you kind of know who the actor is. So for example, this house as Joe Biden would do X. This house as Xi Jinping would do X. So these are all instances where we know this guy, and so we can, with some certainty, explain what their life looks like, their interests look at what affects them, and therefore what their interests look like. There are another set of actor emotions that don't conform to this. So for example, this house as an average person, this house as a working mother, this house as an attractive young woman. All of these are starts of emotions that I've seen. And in these cases, you just don't know what they want. Because like there's so many, right? And like these motions tend to isolate one characteristic, like in this case, it's being average. In the other cases, you're attractive, you're young, and you're female. But those identity markers don't form your identity. Like, I guess, I don't know, I'm a university undergraduate, and a history major, but that would tell you a very small part of who I am. And so what happens is that in trying to characterize what these people want, it's a free-for-all. And what will win is a characterization battle. In this case, I suspect average person was meant to reduce the impact of this characterization battle. Because you just ask, what does the average person look like? What is their life like? And it's trying to basically get you to a median, I think. But I just want to flag this out because there's a lot of actor motions nowadays that tend towards the second sort of motion, right? So it's a characterization battle, what the average person wants. And it's really a free-for-all in characterizing what they want and what they might not believe in. And this will be the impact of this will become clearer later in the lecture. Second, what would immortality mean? And these are just some questions that need to be asked, right off the bat. Like, would you want people to know that you're immortal? Is it feasible whether people know or don't know? Not like whether it's feasible to be immortal. Yeah, because motion gives you that. How would people react? What would you do? All of these are questions that need to be asked. So what I'm going to do, similar to the other video, is I'm going to broadly go through these first, and then the case will be obvious. So first, how would you live this infinite life? And so basically, we were opening up in this motion. Amy and I. Amy is my teammate. And so what we did was we really hammered home on this, because basically in this question on how you live infinite life is a question that government answers or proposition answers. And so in our room, and so they have a choice, right, whether they want to tell the whole world or not tell the whole world. And from what I heard after the round, there were different choices that government made. The important thing is not to be aware that you need to make this choice. There is no one right choice, but you need to be aware. And so what happens is if you decide that you want to hide, then the question is, can you hide? And so what happens is then there's a real characterization battle that will happen. And basically in the round, we really went in on this because we thought that if we could prove that government couldn't successfully hide, then we had all kinds of harms that we could throw at them, or that the process of hiding was going to be painful. So the important thing here is the motion sounds like it's like a bit airy-fairy, right? Do you want to have live forever or not live forever? But what's important is to think about what that living forever would look like. Those details are what's going to create your case. So in this case, what we said was, for example, that look, if you want to live off the grid, you're going to need to be really rich. you're gonna need to have really good, be really good at evading security. You're gonna need to keep moving around because people will kind of figure out that you haven't aged. And that can only be possible for so long, right? And so that's sort of the characterization that Op would push. Gov in our room pushed the reasons why they thought you'd be rich, reasons why they thought you would be able to move around, because they claimed the older you got, the better you got at like breaking or understanding how people work and breaking down and like circumventing security systems. We replied by being like, no, security systems are constantly improving, and the older you get, the worse you get at learning new things. And we gave the reasons for that being true, right? So for example, the older you like, learning new things tends to mean unlearning old things, but people are reluctant to unlearn old things and find it difficult because it's called force of habit. Or you've got so much past knowledge you don't know what specifically needs to go in order for you to update yourself, basically. Like my point is that this is such a broad motion that whatever you do, you just have to give reasons for why that's true. And that's what I was trying to illustrate the example. So yeah, that's a clash on whether you can hide, what that hiding looks like, and the implications of it. So one thing we suggested is you can't have friends, right? Because people will start to notice that you haven't aged if they keep seeing you. So that's if Gov chooses to hide. The other choice that Gov can make is to not hide. And in that case, the question is how people are going to treat you. In this case, and actually to some extent the above case, another trick in characterization that becomes very useful is to analogize it to other instances. So one example might be pop culture. How in pop culture and movies do we treat people who are really different? Now, I have no clue. I don't consume much pop culture except music. But it seems to me that this would be a plausible explanation. Alternatively, you can look at other similar instances, right? So for like where people have appeared to be like medical marvels, something really unique. And why the way we treat you would differ, would therefore be negative. So for example, negative or positive, right? So for example, off the top of my head, the best example I could come up with was like back in the day when people were seen as exotic, because for example, they were from the tribe, they were foreign, and the way people just glare at you, or even I guess even now, right? If you're like Asian in some places overseas, the way people stare at you because you're just unique and weird. And if that's on an average basis, what would we do with someone who was that special? Or are people generally nice to people who are different? Or are they likely to be like meaner to people who are different? Are they likely to, for example, consider you a freak? And consequently, in my room, there was a suggestion that they'll use you for medical research. I'm not sure how convinced I am of that, but these are the ideas that you can push, right? For why you'll be treated badly. On the other hand, I think you can suggest that this guy's going to be a celebrity, and we tend to treat celebrities well. Whether we tend to treat celebrities well is up to debate. And how well and how poorly you're treated is probably up to debate. But I think that these analogies are the best way in which you can construct how people will treat you. The important thing to note in making these analogies is that the analogy is not in and of itself enough. So you can't just go, look, we treat celebrities well, consequently we'll treat you well. You need to explain why we treat celebrities well, or why you think we treat celebrities well, why you are therefore a celebrity, and why therefore you'll be treated well. So that's how you use an analogy, right? All those links need to be drawn. And that's how I think you characterize how people would treat you. So Gov makes this choice, Op needs to react to Gov making this choice. Next, what would infinite life actually look like, right? And so there's first a question of, well, of course, if you're average, by definition, at the point of the motion, you are not yet wealthy. The question is, from then, will you then be wealthy? And this is, again, something that I think is up for debate. Whether being older and knowing how the world works helps you gain money, or on the converse, whether like the way capitalist systems work just means they're going to be stuck in a middle class or worse lifestyle moving forward. So these are, I think, discussions that need to be considered by both sides. Social relationships, what's definite is that everyone's going to die. What's not definite is how you will react to that, right? So will you be able to form social relationships? Will you be okay with that? What will those relationships now look like? All of those, I think, are, again, very much up for debate. Finally, what would you do to be happy or fulfilled? So what will you do with this time, basically? Because that would be I think, for Gov, the one level of the impact thing that they would run, about why, what the things you can do with this time, basically. And on op, I suspect, you would be running the converse, which is to say, well, being happy and fulfilled, there's a diminishing marginal utility to these things. For example, diminishing marginal utility means the more you have of it, the less value it has. Like if I had $9, an extra dollar is a significant difference. If I had $999, the extra dollar means less. So the same logic here. If you've had so much joy already, what value is the extra joy in the way you see this life? And the reason that's important is because if the extra value of joy is lower, then plausibly op can argue that the implications of like whatever hits you get or sadness are greater as well. There is some stuff about how humans tend to be risk averse and or loss averse, and therefore weigh loss higher, that I found compelling when we tried to run it on op. So yeah, that's, I think, the response as to the idea that, oh, you can do anything in the world, so you'll be very happy. Yeah, so the final thing, before the case, is what does dying actually mean to people? And this is an important part of your consideration. In fact, I struggled a bit to structure the order in which you would do these, because, well, in the 15-minute prep, I kind of did them all together with Amy, and more importantly, they kind of all like link to each other, which is why it's very difficult for you to put them apart and do them one by one. You kind of end up considering them in tandem with each other. So what does dying mean to people in the status quo? And the reason why I want to isolate this is because death is the most inherent thing in the debate. Death versus time, right? So just now we talked about time. Now we're talking about death. And these are the most inherent things in the round. So these are the things that you do need to consider. So death, it means fear, right? Something that a lot of people fear. And in the round when we debated, we did try very hard to prepare responses to this idea of people fearing death and to explain why they would not fear death. There's a lot of uncertainty about death, I think. This links in part to fear, but also actually is important if you consider the comparative, because nothing in the motion guarantees they're going to die at the ripe old age, right? Like if you don't take this option, maybe you die tomorrow in a car crash or something. So that uncertainty is important to consider in the debate, because it changes the comparative of what you're going to run. I.e., it's not like we are comparing immortality to long life, in which case, op might be right, they get to do a lot of things you want to do. We might well be comparing immortality to very, very short life, or worse, something happens to you and you live a like suboptimal life to how you wanted to live it moving forward. So I think all of these are at play in that uncertainty. Third, I think there's an idea of the lack of opportunity to do things because of the limited time that death creates. And this is the most inherent thing that is solved by prop, right? Because you now have infinite time versus limited time. I said that, how does all of these things impact the case? So the first thing is that Gov needs to make this choice on whether you want to hide or not hide. And you need to prove whether hiding is possible or impossible. It's possible. On op, if you don't, on the other hand, if you don't want to hide, you need to prove why people treat you okay, or you'll be okay the way people treat you. All of this follows from the top. Then, right, honestly, the stuff that we talked about just now, about fear, about lack of opportunity, and people probably regretting what they didn't manage to do. Even earlier, stuff about what you would want to be happy and fulfilled. All of this stuff is things that you would say, well, I want to avoid that fear, I want to avoid that unfulfillment, and I solve that. So honestly, any of these arguments can be the Gov case. On the op, right, you need to react to the Gov for sure. And then the biggest positive thing that I think can say for Gov follows from that characterization of what life is like, to say that this is really bad, and independently something about how, friends are really important, and you're not going to have many friends if they're constantly dying and you get used to it over time, right? And so why humans are social creatures. So just now we talked a bit about social relationships and not having friends. I think that comes in here as well. So trade-offs and how do you win the debate? So the first obvious trade-off that is almost certainly going to happen is the probability of being found out or the probability of being treated badly. And here, the important thing about this first line is that op can win on percentages, i.e., even if it's probably the case that you can survive without being found out, the minority possibility that you are found out might be really, really bad if you can prove a significant harm accrues from being found out. And it's so bad that we don't want to take that risk. And this logic actually applies in a lot of other debates. For example, there's a very, very small, there's not a very high chance, right, that war happens to Singapore. But because there's that possibility and the impact of us not being prepared will be so great, there's a justification for having NS, right? So I think a similar logic applies here. And in all honesty, when op reaches that trade-off, I'm not convinced that Gov can say, well, this is a minority chance, so we'll let it slide, as long as op has sufficient impacting there of why the harm will be really bad. However, I do think that what Gov has going for them is that op has certain harms. You are certainly going to die. You are certainly not going to have a very long life. You are certainly going to not do everything you want to do. You are certainly going to, I don't know, fear death, maybe, right? And so or you're certainly going to degenerate as like physically, or very, very likely to degenerate physically. And that's very likely going to be very painful for you. So that certainty is the way in which Gov can weigh against this and be like, look, yes, there's a possibility now that you'll lead a very bad life. There's a certainty they're going to live a relatively pretty bad life if you don't take this immortality offer. And so these comparisons are how you would engage in the debate. Now, the reason why I can't go into that much detail is because I really think that this is a motion, and this goes back to what I've said. I promised to say about why it's despite my personal preference against it, it's a good motion to set, or it's a plausible motion to set, is that the motion's very broad because it's not something that we really debate about, but yet it's something that we kind of are familiar with, like we've seen it in pop culture. And consequently, there are a lot of things that you can run. And in a motion where there's so many little things that can be run, what happens then is that the win depends on your ability to react. Not just react and being like, no, that's not true, but react in taking that argument versus your argument, finding a metric by which you can compare them and explaining why that metric is relevant and why you win on that metric. So honestly, like the variety of things that can happen, the motion just calls on teams to react on the floor, rebut, but most importantly, trade off and prove why one set of harms are more important than another set of harms, whether that's on likelihood or impact of the harm. Yep, so that's this presentation.